when I joined the service, it was pretty much an understanding that, the only time you really wore uniform was on post and, as you commuted to and from post, right? As you went about your business in the community, you did not wear a uniform, and it was meant to be understated because, and at least, the principle is that the show is not about you. And that has changed significantly. As we're seeing now that the TSA lines are, they have dedicated TSA lines for the members of the armed services, and to say something against that is almost considered treasonous or heretical. But what they fail to understand, I think, is that it's actually a problem because it separates the military from the people that they're supposed to serve.
It's creating a new class system where senators get groped and citizens get groped, but you are the Praetorian Guard of the Emperor. You are, basically, you're not going to have your genitals groped.
And the real problem is that what that's going to do is it's going to change from this gratitude and fawning over the military to hidden contempt, and that's a really, really dangerous place to be. I've lived in countries where the military had played a significant role in government, and they are not viewed with a high degree of respect. They're viewed with fear, and that's just not the place that we want to go. So,
well, I agree with you, but as you know, in any third world country or despotic nation, the military is involved. And the secret arrest, the NDAA, all these things that are happening, the attempt to get rid of posse comitatus has gone on forever. Now they openly are overthrowing it. Again, you talk about the psychology of the Praetorian class, where it's there to condition us just to acquiesce to anything. Speak to that. Let's get into more of your article.
Sure. So, there's a few things that the Praetorian class that you can always count on them for, and that is that their entire mindset is geared towards their martial duties, right? So their conversation, everything, and that leads to the next really identifying trait, and that is that they really socialize internally. So it's not necessarily that the Praetorians class wants to control. They're sort of almost they're the amoral enforcer of the edict of the political class. And that's the part that's significant, is the fact that they're separate from the political class. They sort of view themselves as standing outside of the entire environment and sort of serving as the traffic cop, just directing, the life. They're not from the community. They are outside of it. And it's the political classes really very, very odd and very, I don't know, how would I put it? It's a very tenuous relationship that they have with the Praetorian class, because the Praetorians view them with contempt, and the political class will throw the Praetorians under the bus at any second, right? Because they're really just tools to be used for their objectives. And so as a result, but one of the things that you do learn in that environment, and that is that physical imposition and physical dominance and intimidation is what you want, because one, it puts you in a position where you can protect yourself, and so that's what you see with the buzz cuts, the large demeanor and sort of the angry demeanor. It has to do with control, because if you can control people that way, you can reduce the risk to yourself. And so that's what we're seeing.
And then the military works for these new modern emperors, the mega banks. And so now we see militarization of police. But the TSA is a Praetorian class. They're more of like this little wimpy bureaucratic system, but they're actually putting their hands on you. They're going in your pants. This is about total physical domination.
I think it is. I don't know much about them except for when I travel. I view them with a decent amount of contempt. But the thing that's very, very interesting about them is I've just realized they're not actually law enforcement officers. They're not sworn officers. I did not know that until recently. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was. They call themselves federal officers, and Congress is trying to pass a law so they can't use that term. It's government had to create a whole new bureaucratic class outside of the old schools of military and police, because even though it's been corrupted slowly, there's still such bedrock connections to history, esprit de corps, Constitution, Bill of Rights, commissioned officers, that you don't engage the American people. They kind of created more of a brown shirt mob like Hitler did to just occupy the country. And that's now what they're doing with highway checkpoints. And of course, we probably should have described, my fault, that the whole Praetorian model comes out of Rome, as the only military force allowed in Rome. That was more of a house guard of the political class. We probably should have given people a brief history lesson on that to even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's our fault. But
so, it's interesting because, I'm sort of, a big believer in Occam's razor, and that is that, the simplest and most obvious answer is normally correct. And so if you sit there and, one of the reasons why I sometimes question very, very, very convoluted justifications for certain things happening, but there's a flip side to that. And that is that if a system is, its stated objective continues to fail at its stated objective, yet the system survives, then, to quote Ayn Rand, I mean, whenever you think you're facing a contradiction, you have to check your premises. And we have to check the premises, because if what they say consistently is incorrect, yet they're allowed to continue the same way, you have to wonder, well, does that really make sense? I don't know if that makes it. The point that I'm trying to make there is you have a military class, or you have this Praetorian class that engages in some very stated noble ideas, but yet you see these I guess, somewhat underhanded techniques and tactics being employed. You have to wonder, is that really an accident? Is it really a one-off? Or is that really a pattern that's emerging? And I think that's what the discussion is.
Well, previously in our republic, as you know, the police investigators and others were not military, were not Praetorian. They were more of a peace officer, part of the community. Now they have militarized them or turned them into Praetorian. And what did we catch them doing? Shipping guns into Mexico to blame the Second Amendment. And so then there's this argument in the Praetorian class, well, we've got to have these gambits so that we can protect you. But it's not really about protecting us. It's about overthrowing our real form of government.
The concern that I have is that, we've moved from a republic through a democracy. And I actually think that we've now become a bureaucracy in the true original sense. And that is that we now have a variety of institutions that sort of operate unelected officials, really accountable to nobody. And so they have been tasked to take whatever, law is passed by Congress, and now they have to implement them. And so there's really there's no natural mechanism to push back to say, you know what, you've overstepped now. And so that's the real concern. And if you look at the word bureaucracy from its original intent, it's the rule from the desk. And so what you now have is you have these little desk rulers that are not accountable to anybody. And it's not even necessarily a monarchy. It's just, I don't know what's more frightening, if it was organized or the fact that it's spontaneously being allowed to evolve that way.
Well, it's a fear-based culture, too. Statistically, you've got a better chance dying from a champagne cork or a honeybee sting. These are real numbers than terrorists. But you would believe that millions of Americans have been killed by terrorists, and it's imminent death. And this idea that the federal government has jurisdiction everywhere, and it must get rid of all danger and all threats everywhere and be omnipresent. Well, A, that's not feasible. And B, it's just really a giant unconstitutional power grab.
You're absolutely right. The whole idea of that there's risk mitigation and then there's risk elimination. And so I think it's almost like we have set ourselves up for this by talking about how risk can be completely eliminated in life. And so whenever you say, I want you to eliminate all risk, somebody will gladly say, I'll eliminate all risk. Just give me everything you got. And that's what happens.
Yeah, the only person who isn't at risk of something is somebody, I guess, chained up in a dungeon.
Yeah, death is the only position of no risk.
You're right. This is a long article, and you get into a lot of different facets. You've got the floor. Break down this rise of the Praetorian class and why you think the technocrats are pushing for this.
Okay, well, one of the things that I think I think it's been going on for a long time, right? I mean, because, you know, the argument, the opening argument that I make in the article is that everybody is always like talking about the upper, the middle, and the lower class. And I say, while that might be a fair way to categorize people, it really has some significant flaws with it. Number one is that it's a completely arbitrary classification, which lends itself to the class warfare that we're seeing, because somebody's upper class is somebody else's middle class, and then, you know, and so those boundaries are completely vague, and it really lends itself to an us versus them type of an environment. Rather, I say, you know, let's go ahead and break it up where you have a productive class. I call that the economic class. And those are, you know, people that voluntarily participate in the economy, go out and provide services for which they're compensated. Then you have the political class, and the political class are the ones that have figured out, you know what, I can, you know, basically assemble a bunch of, you know, people with guns and say, you know what, tell me, you know, I'm going to figure out a way in which I can sort of rule these people and I can skim off the top. And as that racket continues, they have to develop sort of a, you know, an enforcement arm, very similar to the way the mob works, where they have to have enforcers that to go out there and collect the protection money. And so that's what develops eventually into, initially you just have this small, you know, protection arm, and eventually they become a class completely onto their own because the dragon has been fed that much. And so I go through and I describe what that Praetorian class looks like, right? It's largely going to be your military and your primary law enforcement, but it also becomes, I mean, you know, when you have the Department of Education with a SWAT team, I mean, good grief, what's that all about? And, you know, all these other entities that now, you know, feel that they have to belly up to the bar because they want to, you know, really want to raise the game. And it's very, very, very frightening. And because there's so much noise in our culture today, people don't even take the time to notice it. And inherently, human beings are very adaptable to change. So they don't really have the mechanism where they can say, what was it like 20 years ago? But, you know, you pull up a TV show for 20 years ago, and then all of a sudden there are things that kick in, or some kind of a scent or something that triggers your long-term memory, and you say, you know what? That was a time where things were simpler. There was not so much noise, there was not so much hysteria, and there was not so much fear. And so that's sort of the point that I make in the article, is that, and these things really don't end well. You know, I mean, I don't think that it either ends because they run out of money, or everything just implodes. And, you know, because an organism like this will not restrain itself naturally. It just will not. I mean, you don't come in and say, you know what, we need fewer police officers, we need fewer, you know, we need a smaller military. I mean, it instantly becomes a land grab, you know, almost like the way the piranhas get, you know, during the dry season is, you know, the water lowers and, man, they get aggressive because now you're moving into their turf. And so it really has to be, I believe the only way that you can land this thing safely is that you slowly have to pull back on the cash. That's the only way it's going to work.
Now, again, I want you to continue, because in the second half of this interview, this is where we're getting to the real meat and potatoes. You're right. This does not end well. In every case in history, once the bureaucracy and gets this big, once it hires a bunch of enforcers, it will basically cannibalize. And as things get worse, it will then start mass arrest and the persecutions. I mean, we know A to Z the progression of this, and I get chills thinking about it with small children. And the technocrats admit, well, this stuff's failed before, but we've got, you know, tens of thousands of drones, and we've got, you know, high-tech propaganda, and we're going to be able to complete this. And so they're going to shake old ladies down for taxes they don't owe. They're going to take property. They're going to literally implode things and wreck the society. And we see that happening now. So you say we land this by cutting the money off. Well, Ron Paul's trying to cut the money off slowly, and they're acting like he's the devil.
Very, very disturbing, and you know, that's the problem. You know they get to cozy up to that big table with lots of food on it, you know, and lots of cash that's been printed, and all of a sudden, it's nice and toasty in here. I don't want to go back out in the cold. And so I think that's what happens, you know, to the political class. And that's another thing I talk about, is where the political class is, you know, what do you have? You